Well, hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today I've got with me Drake Kelch in the house, the one and only. Happy to have him on the channel today. And Drake used to be the former production manager, I think, at Bethel for a few years, and now he's the owner of Lad Designs. And this man is the man that you go to when you have questions about cinema broadcast stuff. So happy to have you on the channel, Drake.
Thanks for having me today. Stoked to be here.
Yeah, man. You know, you've done a lot of crazy cool stuff in the last few years that you've been doing this, but I was thinking about, like, we all start somewhere, right? So what was like your
100%.
beginning experience with cameras? Maybe what was your first camera? How'd you get into all this?
Yeah. My first camera that I ever owned was a Canon 10D, which was photos only at the time. Old camera, like right out of film into digital. Very old camera. That was my first camera, and my first camera that actually took video was the Canon T3i. So like the Rebel T3i. I shot a lot of weddings in my teenage years on that camera. But then my first like broadcast or cinema camera was a Canon GL2. So the DV tape, like mini DV
Oh,
back
classic,
way back.
man. Yeah, that's what I started shooting
Yeah,
with. Oh, I hated that camera.
exactly.
But I loved it at the time. It was amazing.
Yeah, exactly. So like a lot of the early Jesus Culture stuff, when Jesus Culture was part of Bethel, was all shot on the GL2s and XL2s.
No way.
So all the like We Cry Out, like that album, the one Your Love Never Fails, I think was the one before that. Those were all shot on those cameras.
And so do you
And
still
so
have
those
these
kind of,
DV tapes laying around?
I'm sure someone does.
Yeah, I've still got tons of them laying around. Now, what were you editing in those
Yeah.
videos?
Final Cut,
Okay.
6 or 7, I think. Yeah, with a PowerBook G4, an
Oh my
old, like the
gosh.
old before the MacBook Pros came
That's
out. Yeah,
amazing. Now, did you jailbreak your Canon camera and put, what's the Magic Lantern on there?
Magic Lantern. Yep.
You got it to go
Yeah, it
right.
was like I always wanted the 5D Mark II, but it was too expensive for me at the time, and so I had the T3i, put Magic Lantern on it. That unlocked some stuff and it was really cool. And then eventually skipped the 5D Mark II and got a 60 because that came out and it was like full frame and did everything. And so I moved to that. I actually still have one. Actually, I can't believe it. I still have one over there,
Yeah.
the 60 Mark One. And then kind of progressed from there. Moved into Sony for a while. Got the A7S2, or I had the A7S1, A7S2, 6300, 6500. Moved back to Canon for the 1DX Mark II. That was definitely inspired by like the Peter McKinnon videos and things like that. So I still have a 1DX, and then now what I'm shooting on right now is an A7S3. So I kind of back to Sony.
Okay.
And that's just kind of like the SLR stuff. Obviously, in the cinema world, at Bethel, because that's where I'm from, we had the GL2s. We went to Sony broadcast cameras. We went to newer Sony broadcast cameras. We went to Ursa Mini Pros. And then when I left, we had started the switch to Komodo, Red Komodo.
Yep.
So kind of gone through that. And I have had a Komodo, or a couple of them. I've had different cinema cameras. I kind of cycle through gear really fast and often.
That's awesome, man. Wow. So are you
Yeah.
self-taught? I mean, you just YouTube University kind of guy, or?
Yep, YouTube, and then just hands-on doing it. I was that guy at Bethel that was like, "Hey, we need to do this," and I said, "I'll figure it out."
So you
And
didn't
so I
have,
just
like, you didn't have another church that you looked at and said, we want to do it like them at that point. Was there somebody that inspired it for you?
so honestly, the cinema side of things, yes. So talking about the Jesus Culture stuff is actually perfect. Nathan Grubbs was a tech director at Bethel, but he also worked for Jesus Culture, and he did all of the Jesus Culture videos. And he was really in that cinema world, or tried to be in that cinema world. And Bethel Music would bring him on to do Worship You stuff, or like the For the Sake of the World, that record, the one that we shot on the mountaintop. No, I'm blanking on that one, but those were all shot by Nathan. So most of the epic Jesus Culture or Bethel Music stuff was shot by Nathan. So he was kind of like the inspiration for cinema. but I wanted to take it further into the broadcast. I always hated a traditional 60 frames, just cover the stage broadcast. Like it just wasn't inspiring to me. And that's where I'm like, let's merge the cinema with the broadcast. And, you know, there's other people. Elevation's been putting out stuff forever. And they all have great videos, but most of these videos are done in post. Like they're just recorded on camera, edited in post. They look good. We shot a lot of old Bethel Music stuff on 5D Mark IIs just because full frame cameras, they look amazing, depth of field, the whole thing. But I think as technology has progressed, especially with the Ursas, when that came out, the Ursa Mini Pros, it was like, okay, we can do a cinema broadcast because now we're getting these cinema cameras that offer broadcast technology. And I think that it's just kind of spiraled from there.
Yeah, man. Well, speaking of concerts and live broadcast stuff, one of my favorites that I didn't realize you were the one that was in charge of this until later on. I probably watched it 100 times, but that's the Rooftop experience from Cory Asbury. And so, was that during COVID? Am I remembering that right? Like during kind of shutdown time? So that experience of like filming on a rooftop and like, what were some of the crazy things that happened behind the scenes with that? I mean, did you actually have a drone live streaming to a controller and then somehow getting that in? I mean, it would seem crazy to me.
Yeah. Yeah. So that one was, he released his album and they wanted to do a live like record release party. But obviously during COVID, you can't, there's a lot of restrictions. We couldn't really do that. And so that rooftop is actually his rooftop. So it's kind of like, hey, we have access to this rooftop. And it's in downtown Kalamazoo. So let's film something up there, invite some friends and just, go at it. So I was asked to direct that. And then, Caleb, who still works for Bethel Music, he was the producer. And then, so we kind of collaborated on how are we going to do this rooftop thing. So all those lights, all the sound equipment, the video gear, we had to take it all up a spiral staircase to the roof. That was our only access. And I think myself and Liam, who did lighting for that, we probably touched every single piece of equipment that came up on the roof. It was like we hauled everything up there. And some of it was like 4 people like pushing it up from the bottom. It was kind of crazy.
Yeah, because y'all shot day to night, which I thought was super interesting and probably a challenge.
Yeah, so we started in the daytime. We actually Dante did like a pre-show thing that was on the live stream. I don't think it's actually on YouTube still. And then Cory started, and it was like, the idea was to get dusk so we could see the sunset and then go into nighttime and you could see the lights of the buildings and that kind of thing, just because, we're in downtown on a roof. And so we used Airy L5C fixtures and then the Forest 2, the Color Force 72s were the bars. And those got us the brightness that we needed to compete with like the sun. Yeah. Essentially. And so we used those, and then also we used Red Gemini for that one, which is like their low light camera, so to speak. And so the idea was hey, we might actually need more light out of the camera sensor than we typically would, just because we are going into dark and kind of not knowing what we're getting into. No rehearsal, just we set it up and filmed basically. My choice was the Red Gemini just because I knew that it could handle the dynamicness of the day to night. And so that's why I chose that camera.
How many cameras were you shooting on that one?
We had 4 Reds, and then we had the drone.
Okay.
And the funny thing was my first Komodo shipped to me as I was hoping that it was going to arrive before I left, and it didn't. It arrived the day after I left. So that would have been the first time I ever used a Komodo, but I didn't get it in time. So, we used the 4 Geminis, and then we used an Inspire 2, DJI's bigger drone. And they have a broadcast mode, which essentially sends 720p to the controller, has an HDMI out that you can go into your switcher.
Okay.
So that's how we did that. And then we recorded, because it's the Inspire, we could record 5K raw on it. And so the edit they replaced.
Okay.
For post, they replaced the drone because it was 720p for the live stream, which obviously doesn't look that
That's what I was going to
great.
ask, is how many overdubs and that kind of stuff did y'all go back and do with audio and video and stuff?
So the audio, they did overdub a couple things because the keys rig cut out, like stopped working.
Yes. Yes. I was like, what happened? And he's over there fiddling with it. And then he even makes a comment
Uh-huh.
like, the glorious keys are back or something like that.
Yeah, yeah. So the keys stopped working at one point, so we had to fix that. And then Zach from Bethel Music, he went and re-edited it, but for the most part, he followed the same cut and just fixed some stuff that I would have fixed too. There was a couple like bad calls on my part, or even better shot where I could have like left the camera hanging longer. So he kind of just fixed that. But on some of my multi-views, I put the program cut and the edit
Yes.
like side by side, and you can see like it's really close for the
Yeah.
most part. It followed the same thing.
Yeah. That's pretty neat. So you recording on camera and then, so not into
Yep.
like any hyperdecks or anything like that, just recording on camera and then going SDI out of them or wireless or something.
Yeah, so everything was hardwired, SDI right out of the camera. I just went into the Blackmagic television studio that has the buttons and the switcher all in one. And then I just recorded my multi-view on a Sumo. And then, yeah, we recorded 6K raw internal on the cameras.
Ooh, nice. Very nice. Well, I just love that. And it's so cool to see just a different kind of spin on a worship event like that. And so props, man, that turned out super good.
And to this day, even those operators, like the 4 camera ops that we have, they all say that was their favorite shoot ever.
Wow.
It was just one of those ones where we could be creative. And even though we were filming for a product, it just didn't feel that way. Like it just felt like we were allowed to be creative. We could just get what we wanted to. And probably the best ops I could have asked for that shoot, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's pretty cool. Well, one of the questions I get all the time when I'm talking to guys that are,
Yep.
watching my channel is, if they want to move to this more cinematic style that they've seen people like Bethel and other churches do, what would you tell somebody that has like an old PTZ system or just more like your typical broadcasts, camcorder style stuff? Like, what are some of the first questions you might ask them or directions you might give?
Yeah. So I'd probably split it into like 2 categories, I guess, if you're trying to upgrade your system. The first is obviously your cameras and lensing, because that's a huge part of it. And then the second would be your backbone, or like your infrastructure. So like switcher, router, monitors, all that kind of stuff. They go hand in hand. And some churches I go into where their backbone is fine and it might just need a few components. And so we can really focus on cameras and lenses. Some, their system, like I'm working with a church right now, and their system is still 480p. Like it's not even 720. So it's like really, really old. And sadly, they're wanting to move into the cinematic broadcast like we all are. And the sad reality is everything has to be removed and we have to put in all new stuff. There's
Wow.
just no way to use that current infrastructure at all. We can't even use the cabling. It's like that old. So yeah, that's why I break it down into 2 categories. And it really kind of just depends on how extreme they want to go. I've done systems anywhere from like, I've done a broadcast system for like 20K. That's like the cheapest ever. And it's very, very, very basic. It works. It's not the greatest thing in the world. Scaling that up to, you can do something for 100K, 250K, like that $250,000 budget actually gets you quite a bit. But then I've done systems $1 million plus where they're like, we want to go all out. And that wasn't even all out. I think that if we went all out, it would be more like the $2-3 million budget,
Wow.
which is just mind boggling. So that's still Blackmagic switchers and Blackmagic like infrastructure. And we put more money into the cameras and the lenses and some of like the robotics and things like that we were using, and kind of said, we can do 4K with Blackmagic. Blackmagic's fine. It works. Like it works really well. And so
Wow.
we're going to stick with that. We're not going to go raw soul tricks or anything like that. And we're going to focus the money towards like the cameras and lenses. So
Yeah.
yeah, I guess the budgets can range. You can do a lot with a little. You can buy used. There's a lot of things that you can do to kind of piece it together.
That's a great point though, about breaking it up like that, because I don't think a lot of people are considering all that infrastructure stuff that really does play a big part, especially if you're wanting to do iMag or something like that. It just complicates it even
Yeah.
more. And so you got to
Hmm.
have those conversations. But what would you say if somebody was like, hey, could I take my PTZ system and maybe just repurpose that to like have some stage shots or something, and then like just start with two cameras, in the main center area?
Hmm.
Can you do that? I mean, have you ever done something like that?
Yeah, you totally can. I'm kind of helping a church do that right now, where they have PTZs and they want to move to red Komodos, and they're probably only going to buy two or three right
Hmm.
off the bat. And so it's like, let's keep the same traditional style broadcast where it's kind of like you have a tight, wide, and maybe a 45.
Hmm.
And we're going to keep them on sticks, but we are going to upgrade our cameras and lenses to something better. And then as they can progress, it's like, let's add a fourth, fifth, sixth camera and, start adding more stage shots, that kind of thing. So you can kind of piece it together. I guess I'd probably shift more towards maybe let's look, I mean, the Komodo is really cheap, but like maybe let's look at a pocket 6K or something like that
Hmm.
that allows us to add a couple more
Yep.
and then put more money into glass. There's a lot of like ways that you
Sure.
can kind of shift that around. But again, the client can kind of drive that. At the end of the day, the client that I'm working with right now, they're like, no, we want Komodos because we want to future forward and get everything Komodo. And it's like, great, then let's do that.
Yeah. That's cool. Well, that brings me into another question of just like, what is your favorite handheld cinema, camera lens combo that you're probably installing in a lot of places? Is it the Pocket 6K? Is it one of the Reds?
Yeah, I mean, the most popular one that I use right now is probably Red Komodo with the Sigma 18 to 35.
Okay.
That's like very basic. And honestly, you can build a good Komodo handheld rig for sub 10K, like even with wireless. Like you could get it at that 10K mark or sub that if you want to. That lens is really cheap, gorgeous lens. I mean, the last thing that I did, the Christmas concert that I just directed and produced, had 5 of those Sigma 18-35s on it.
Oh,
So
wow.
honestly, it's like one of my favorite lenses ever.
I love it.
um,
Yes. It's the first lens I
just
bought.
like, yeah, I mean, gorgeous lens. I know like we've done some productions when we have like a Canon 17 to 120 with a Komodo on handheld, which is a big rig. That lens is like $24,000. So again, not I can't spec that everywhere. Gorgeous lens, works up, and it's amazing. There's nothing that has that 17 millimeter to 120 millimeter at 2.8 out there. Um, so I mean, if you can afford it, awesome. But the 18 to 35, $500, and
Yeah.
it's a killer lens. Looks amazing.
So tell me, if like somebody like me that doesn't know a ton about these bigger rigs like that, why couldn't, like, what's the biggest differences between a Red Komodo and like saying like my GH5 with a speed booster and an 18 to 35 on it? Is it that just the global shutter, that I'm not having any rolling shutter when I'm doing handheld whip pan stuff? Is it the color science and then being able to bake in a LUT? I mean, what's your thoughts there?
Yeah, this is really funny. I actually just dropped a video today talking about using DSLRs and mirrorless cameras versus actual cinema cameras.
Sweet.
And it just launched on YouTube today. But basically, the big overall picture is that things like GH5, which I have used for a broadcast before, they have tons of limitations with like lens mounts, latency out of the camera. They only have HDMI,
Hmm.
and they're just kind of built to record internal only, and that's it. Modern cinema cameras, I think more companies like Sony, Panasonic, Blackmagic, Red, they are, even Canon especially, they are recognizing what we're doing in the market and kind of making their cameras work in that realm. So having things like HDMI out, built-in ND filters, lens mounts that you can adapt to accept PO lenses. You have less latency, LUTs, camera control. I mean, the list goes on about what you can use a cinema camera for, versus like a DSLR. Again, if this is all you have, if all you have is this camera, then go for it. You can still achieve something great with this. But if you're starting from scratch, it's like I would highly recommend moving into the cinema camera world. Even like the Pocket 6K, great camera. It's more like a DSLR with how it's shaped, harder to rig, but it looks good.
Yeah.
It has great color science, great dynamic range. I think some of the older cameras we see, like I'm testing a couple old Sonys right now just to see what I can get out of them, and I've just noticed that the dynamic range isn't quite there versus like a Komodo, and it's like the dynamic range is like through the roof. You know, you could have something blown out and it's not technically it's overexposed, but it's not blown out.
Yeah.
Like that's hard to achieve in a camera.
Yeah.
So that's where I think the cinema cameras, you'll get more of that. Look, and obviously the Komodo is global shutter. To me, the global shutter is fine. Like it doesn't bother me if you have a global shutter, running shutter. It's like whatever. Having the global shutter is great for LED. If you're shooting against LED, it looks amazing. But it's not a make or break it. Like I'm not going to base my camera purchase based off of a global shutter, or rolling shutter, basically.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, those are great points. I'll link that in the description. I'll find that video on your channel and put that in there so you guys can check that out. I mean, speaking of the other camera stuff that I think is a little intriguing to somebody that is trying to maybe build this out is like you see the cinema things and then you see like these big Fujinon lenses on there with some kind of gears on them. Like, you know, first of all, like what is the cheapest that you can achieve something like that? I've seen some people use like C200s with like a cheaper Sigma lens maybe, or what's your go-to for like a tight follow pastor cam that has servo controls? Oh, he's breaking it out.
So this is probably my go-to if you're on a cheap budget. This is the Sigma 150 to 600, and they just released the 60 to 600.
Yeah.
It's still like $2,000 for that lens, but in comparison, you know, a lot of the lenses that we take on tour and stuff are like the Canon 50 to 1000, and that's a $70,000-$80,000 lens. Or the new PL, the new Fuji box lens that they made PL mount, incredible, 25 to 1000, 2.8, like stabilized, incredible lens. That's like a $220,000 lens. So it's like if I can spec that and use it, I'm going to. But at the end of the day, not very many people can afford that. Yeah. And that's where Sigma has great lenses. The 50 or the 60 to 600, the 120 to 300. Canon has their 100 to 500. Sony has a 200 to 600. So those are all in that like $1,500 to $3,000 lens range.
And those are
and it looks good.
Yeah, those are like higher f-stop lenses, which to me, as somebody who comes from like this micro four thirds world, I'm like f5.6 scares me, you know? And so, but like, what are you usually setting things at for these bigger, fuller frame cameras and stuff?
Yeah. So even if I have like at Bethel, we've been using the 40X, the Canon 40X HJ40 for a long time. It's a B4 broadcast lens. It's basically like a 450 millimeter, like a 20 to 450 millimeter lens, with servos and the whole thing. Like it's a great lens back in the day. But we still run it's f2.8 lens, but we still run it at like f4 and a half anyways, because honestly, when you're, and I tell people this all the time, when you're rocking 400 millimeters or you put a doubler on that, you're rocking 800 millimeters, them moving just the tiniest fraction, they're out of focus at 2.8. Like you can't maintain focus. And that's where I tell people like crank it up to 4.5, 5.6 even, just to keep that person to where you're not having to like rock your focus all the time. And especially if you don't have a servo lens, you're going to have to like reach up there and grab your focus. Like that's, you know, you can't do that for an hour while someone's preaching. And so that's where I'm like, just the f-stop on long zooms, like the high f-stops just don't ever scare me. I'm like, I mean, I run into that anyways. So, and then you run into like compression. I'm trying to figure out the best way to make a video about this, because when you're running 600 millimeter with a 1.5x extender or something like that, the compression that you get out of it is kind of adding that depth of field that you want from an f2.8 lens at 200 millimeters anyways.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to figure out the best way to like make a video about that and kind of explain that concept of like, because I get that all the time. People are like, I need a lens that does 1,000 millimeters at 2.8, and I'm like, doesn't really exist. Even in the lenses that cost $80,000 at 1,000 millimeters, they're still 3.5 or f5. Like, so it's just like it doesn't really exist.
I love it, man. I love getting nerdy like this because this is some of the stuff I'm talking about and thinking about a lot. And my wife's like, "What are you speaking German? What is this?"
Yeah, exactly.
Let's do this. This is I haven't asked you about this, but let me throw out some different cinema cameras, and you just give me some pros and cons that some that I've heard people considering just off the top of your head. So Panasonic EVA ones.
Yeah, not my favorite. I know Transformation had some of them. Chad Vegas, over at Transformation, they had some with their Vericams. And I think if you're in the Vericam ecosystem, that Panasonic ecosystem, they work great. But I haven't used them a ton, but it wouldn't be my first choice of a cinema camera in that price range because I think they are like $6,000 or $7,000.
Okay,
if I remember right.
What about? Have you tried the Z cams?
I have not tried any of the Z cams.
Okay,
that's on my list of cameras to try. They look, I mean, specs per price looks awesome. Are they worth anything? I don't know. I haven't tried.
Yeah, that's one that I've seen floating around that I'm always kind of intrigued by. Like, maybe that might fit the bill for some churches. I don't really know for sure. Ursa Broadcast G2s. That's all the rage right now. I mean, what's the negatives of those?
They're honestly a killer camera for $30,000 or whatever, $3,500 or whatever the broadcasts are, and then you can get the kit with the Fuji lens for like 12 to 15,000 or something like that. Killer camera. The Ursas, Blackmagic, they just keep getting better. The Ursas just keep getting better. If you run the whole Blackmagic ecosystem, I can't like complain about it. It just works, and I think that's where Blackmagic, they had their eyes set on traditional broadcast and they landed in the church market. And there's nothing wrong with them. They look good. They have good dynamic range. They have the lens mounts. I mean, we were doing a tour last year and we had to get Ursas instead of Komodos. And we were all kind of like, we forgot how good these look. Like, all the rage went Komodo because of, it's the new cheap cinema camera, but like these actually look pretty dang good.
Yeah.
For what they are.
Dependable in your experience? Super dependable?
Yeah, I mean, so at Bethel, I think we've gone through like 9 of them over 5 or 6 years. So, like, they will die. Their sensors will go out. Their power supplies will go out. But if you take that investment and it's $6,000 for an Ursa, and you get 6 years out of it, that's a pretty good run rate, in my opinion, for a Chinese camera.
Absolutely. Yeah. What about like, I know Red Rocks, I don't know if they still have them, but they were saying they were moving to like C300s and stuff from Canon.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the new C300s are pretty great looking. They offer a lot of features. They offer a lot of camera control features for broadcast, which is really cool. The older C300 Mark IIs and the C200s, I do not like the C200s at all. I demoed them once. Canon sent me 8 of them to use for a conference. And I just hated them so much. Like,
why? What did you hate about them?
Color science was so wrong to me, which is funny because I love this. Like, I love the 1DX, but the C200 just did not look like it at all. It was very, very red. Had to do a lot of color correction to get it to look normal, which I'd say the Ursas look pretty dang normal. Weird quirks. I mean, it's an old camera. Like, you can't get clean feed out of the SDI port if you're using the HDMI port for a local monitor. Like, just dumb stuff like that where I'm like, this drives me nuts. I can't use this camera. So, I mean, again, if you have them, you can get good looks out of them. Red Rocks had some sort of Canon camera. Mainly, this is really funny because the old Canon House of Worship rep, who now works for Red, he's based in Denver and went there. And so he got them all hooked on the Canon cameras, which is really funny.
And now
I know him really well. And that's how like I got connected with Canon through him, and then it was funny. I was using red, and then he called me and was like, "Hey, I'm moving to red." I was like, "Oh, cool, even better."
That's awesome, man. And then obviously, yeah, the reds are getting used a little bit more. It seems like I saw you did a survey. Was that you that did the survey about like what's everybody using for broadcast stuff? And it seemed like mostly Blackmagic stuff, but some red. So what's like the biggest
Yeah,
selling point of that besides the price?
I mean, so I've been into reds forever. I'm trying to pull up that diagram. Yeah, it was like 49% Blackmagic, but red had the largest share. Oh no, Sony, which makes sense. Sony for broadcast,
Yeah.
and it's hard to beat that.
Yeah.
And then red was right up there. But yeah, so I've been using reds forever. I love red cameras. I think their dynamic range, the color science. I mean, obviously, First Films has been there forever. Like it's gorgeous. But they've always been expensive. Even their cheapest option in the DSMC2 was the Raven, which I did own a Raven for a long time, and it's still $15,000. And that's where it's like, for people, that's hard to swallow 15K for a camera, let alone you're trying to buy 5, 6, 7 of them. It's a lot of money. So then when they finally came out with the Komodo, $6,000, like global shutter, 6K, 12G SDI, the whole thing, it's kind of hard to beat that price. I'm like, you're talking, again, C200, Ursa Mini, EVA1, FX6, it's all that price point. Like it hits that price point and you get a red sensor out of it. You get red support out of it.
Yeah.
So that's kind of why I was like, this is probably the perfect cinema camera for broadcast, just because, especially for the church market, because it hits that. And we do, like, I've done a ton of shoots. Like we recently did one in Vegas. And I did a shoot for Imagine Dragons, and I did one for Imagine Dragons, and I did one for Coldplay, and that was on Sony Venice. In the cinema broadcast world, I think when you go high end, like when we did the Imagine Dragons shoot and we did the Coldplay shoot, that was on Sony Venice, which is incredible. I mean, Transformation switched to Venice now, which there's just so much money. Like they cost so much money. The image is gorgeous, but I'm like, you can get 90% there on a Komodo. Looks wise, you might not have all the camera control that you want, but you can get there looks wise on a Komodo, and the Komodo still does things that like the Venice doesn't. Like you can shoot in 6K full sensor size and output 1080p 2398 to your switcher if you still need to stay in 1080. And then you can even record that 6K internal if you want to do that. We do that all the time. Record 6K raw internal, output 1080p to the switcher. Versus like other cameras, you can't, if you need 4K or 1080 output, you have to crop the sensor. And the Venice still has to crop the sensor to 4K to output 4K.
Wow.
Which is just wild. So, that's a $60,000 to $80,000 build for the Venice. And I'm talking, that's just for the body and accessories, not including lens. Komodo is a $6,000 body. You build it out to like 10 grand if you want to go all out, and then you add the same lens and you have a killer camera. So it's just hard to beat. There's just so many pros to it.
Yeah.
The biggest pro or con, and I tell Red this all the time, is it is very latent out of the SDI port. So if you want to do iMag, it has so much latency. Like you're talking 4 to 5 frames of latency out of the SDI port. So for people like I was talking with a church, and they're like, we really love our iMag. We want iMag, but we want cinema. And I'm like, I wouldn't recommend the Komodo, sadly, because of how latent it is. The Ursa is way faster.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I'm going to move towards an Ursa just because the SDI port is way faster.
Yeah. What do you think about on a lower scale, comparing like a Blackmagic 6K Pro with like the Sony, is it the FX3 and FX30 that are considered cinema cameras? Would you ever build out a system around those? I've been intrigued by those.
I've wanted to. I've used Pockets a ton just because that's been, again, Blackmagic in church. It's just like, that's the camera. So I've used them a bunch. But I have an A7S III, which is essentially an FX3. And I've wanted to build out a system on the FX3 or FX30 just because, like, This camera, honestly, I keep finding more and more features that impresses me. The image looks really good. With the Ninja V, this guy, you can record RAW, 4K, 4.5K RAW out of the A7S3 into this ProRes RAW. Right now, I have it set up to where I'm USB-C into my Mac using their webcam driver, so it's my web camera. HDMI out into my Neon over here so I can see it bigger. Plus my Rode microphone's plugged into it, and I'm recording 4K internal on that while it's sending to here. I'm just like, what cameras let you do that? I mean, this camera doesn't let you do that. This would fall apart. So I've been more and more impressed with the Sonys. I've wanted to do an FX3 or FX30 build out just to do it.
Well, and then, I mean, let's just talk about PTZs for a second, because that makes me think of their new release with their, it looked like maybe they had an FX3 on the PTZ head. Have you gotten to play with any of those?
One of my guys, one of my main Defy operators got to use one he was doing a shoot for Intel. It was Intel? Yeah, it was Intel. And Sony sponsored that shoot, and so they had a couple of those there. So essentially, it's a PTZ. Now my dog's in here making noise. It's essentially a PTZ with a Sony sensor. And so you can put whatever lens you want on it, which is really cool because you're not locked to those PTZ lenses. I can rock, if you wanted to, that 50 or 150 to 600 on it. You could put 16 to 35. It kind of unlocks the PTZ creativity a little bit more, which is really cool.
It'll be
but
cool
if you are wanting to go PTZ, Defy. So I work with Defy products a ton, and they have a system that we're installing. I don't know if I should talk about it, but it's basically a PTZ that we can put any camera on.
Kind of like the data video ones that are out there.
Yeah. So we're doing it with a Komodo and a 70 to 200 Canon lens, just to first, like that's our first install of it. It's basically a PTZ, full control using Defy controllers, that kind of thing. So you can put whatever you want on it. And that client was basically like, we need a camera to be in this certain spot. There's no room for an operator. And what it's shooting is the pastor sitting on a stool. He doesn't walk around. We just need something that we can control from the control room. And so they already have a couple of Defy systems, so it was an easy, let's talk to Defy about it. But so there are solutions out there if you want to run like a Red or a Sony or something. Obviously, Sony has their PTZ, but then the other solution I'd say is that we use these a lot for corporate is the Canon PTZs, like the 300 and 500. Yeah. Gorgeous PTZ. And that sounds really funny, but great sensor, great zoom range, good depth of field. For PTZ, it's very much impressed me. So those are great PTZs if you ever are in the actual PTZ market. Mm-hmm. We use them for corporate stuff all the time where it doesn't really matter. They're not looking for cinema. They're just looking for a broadcast. And so we can deploy 10 of them, have them on one controller, have presets. I mean, it's pretty killer if you're in that market.
Okay. Yeah, I think just a lot of churches got into, because I think tech guys are guilty of this, just thinking like, I want to control it all myself. I can't find volunteers, using that cop out. And so they decide to go the PTZ route because it gives them full control and they can be the wizard in the back that gets to, just sit back there and push the buttons. But I mean, it is interesting to see kind of how this market is like, there's newer, better things coming along that maybe eventually, like you're saying, it's so expensive though still to get like a PTZ that's good, like an N500. How much is an N500? Do you know? $4,000 or $5,000 bucks?
I don't know off the top of my head. Yeah, probably.
For the normal run of the mill church, it's like you're getting a camera that can do one job for you.
$5,000.
$5,000, yeah. And then you got to get the controller and
that Sony that we were talking about is $10,000 right. Without a lens.
Yeah,
which is just wild.
At that point, train some people to be camera ops and go get some better cameras.
Or, I mean, honestly, look, and I talked about this because I am a huge fan of volunteers. I understand the volunteer culture. But it's like, okay, we can spend $10,000 on this PTZ without a lens, or we could buy this $2,000 pocket and pay someone $5,000 to learn how to use it. You know what I mean? Like, where does the line start of stop investing in your equipment and start investing in your people?
That's a great point.
Like a huge conversation, because you can buy gear all day long, and I work with churches that have crazy budgets and have all the gear in the world and all the staff. But I also work with churches that have a lot of money and they use all volunteers. But then they have all this great gear and they complain our broadcast doesn't look great. We have all this, $1 million broadcast setup, but our broadcast doesn't look awesome. And I'm like, it's because you're putting all your money into your stuff instead of starting to put your money into your people. You can start raising up people, training them, and paying them, and you're going to get way more work. You're going to get a better work ethic. You're going to get way more out of your people if you're paying them. I totally understand the volunteer thing. Been there, and I even volunteer for a church. So I'm not knocking volunteers by any means, but there is that line where it's like, if you have the money and you're still complaining about something, maybe you should start paying them.
Yeah, start reinvesting into your people. I love that. That's a good thought. Well, let's talk about those churches that are, just the normal sized church in America that post-COVID, they put in something to live stream, and now they're wanting to take things to another level. But then now the question has begun to arise in our community, like, is live streaming actually strategically worth the investment for a church of, let's say 150 people? I'm not talking about, the country church out in the middle of nowhere that's running 40 people. This is still a decent sized church in a suburban town. What do you think? Like, should they be investing in this?
I guess I could see it two ways. That's what I thought. The average size congregation in a church seats around 200 people.
Okay.
So I thought it was close to that 150 number. So yeah. So that is basically the average church in America, is that 150 to 200. I'd say it goes two different directions. I'd say, what's the goal that the church is wanting to do? Are they trying to reach people? Are they trying to maintain their audience of people that physically can't come to their church? Or are they trying to grow their church? Or are they just wanting to maintain what they have? You know what I mean? Like, it's kind of like you have to answer the why behind why you're live streaming. I think COVID hit, everyone started live streaming, whether that was with your iPhone or your laptop over Zoom. Everyone started live streaming. And then we came back to church and everyone kept live streaming. And it's kind of like, I would say, ask yourself, why do you need to still live stream? Is it because it's the thing to do? Do you have a 200 person gathering and it's consistently 200 people and it's the same 200 people? You might not need to live stream. But at the same time, on the flip side, they might say, well, we want to, offer it to the person that's sick or, that can't make it, that kind of thing. Then it comes down to cost. How much are you paying for that live stream? And sadly, and this might sound harsh, but like, okay, is the cost that you're paying for that live stream worth that one person being able to watch that one weekend that they're sick? You know what I mean? Like, there's always, in my brain, I kind of go business. And so I'm like, where's that threshold? Where's that cost? Like, paying for a Resi encoder or, whatever. Obviously you can do cheap streams, but it's like, where does that cost breakdown happen? Some churches that we work with, their viewership is like, we get like 60 people watching on a weekend. I'm like, so your room seats 1,000 and you constantly pack it out, and your live stream has 60 people. Maybe your focus should be on the live congregation because that's what you're good at. You know what I mean? It doesn't seem like you need to be building for more. I don't know. I just think through those things.
Sure. Yeah, I don't know that there's a one size fits all for sure. I love your thought of like, just reverse engineer like you would any goal and figure out the why and start, from there, and then reverse engineer it. It's like, if you want to be a church that's missionally online present and reaching lost people through the online world, then you may have to invest some money into this and some people into this and some training and all those things. But if you want to say like, what, we're going to focus just on our, Jerusalem, as the Bible would say, I guess, and just kind of be a more local church, and that's okay too. You don't have to live stream. And then there's alternatives to not necessarily live streaming. There's lots of benefits to live
Post
streaming.
Post it later. Yeah.
You could always post it later. I mean, the benefits that we've seen in our church, because our church only runs like 400 people on a Sunday, and so we're a small church. We've been live streaming for 12 years, and our audience is still only about 40 or 50 people every Sunday, which was the same amount as one of our services. So it was okay. But the benefits for us is just like content generation for social media. Like it's already done. I can go back and take things out and do that. And we've had countless people that have eventually walked through our door say, man, we've watched online for 6 months, and I call them lurkers because you never even know they're there. So but it is an interesting conversation to have of like, how strategically do you want to use this, and then work back from there. So what do you think though? Go ahead. Well,
I was going to say, like, maybe you are live streaming for those few people that can't make it and you really want to keep that up. So then maybe it's like, okay, look at just live streaming one wide camera at the back of the room. We know our audience isn't big. We're not trying to gain content. We're not trying to gain. So just put one camera wide back of the room, call it good. What I mean? It can be that simple. It doesn't have to be a production.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Whatever meets the need, the best. And trying to be good stewards at the same time in our local bodies, I think is important. It's funny because I made a video talking about how sometimes production people can catfish people by making things look too good. And then somebody shows up in the room, they're like, what is this? But actually, I think more often than not, it's the reverse. Like things are actually pretty good in person, but it looks horrible or sounds horrible online. And so it's like we're reverse catfishing people. So maybe if that's you, maybe it is okay to take it offline for a season and get things to where you need to get them or whatever. So it makes me think though and wonder, Chad Vegas put out a thing talking about what is maybe next in the live streaming world, and thinking more through like technologies that are coming about that is more this immersive experience. And I think that's one of the reasons we've moved to this cinematic style, is to try and help people feel like they're there, that they're a part of it. They're not a fly up on the wall looking down at the stage. They're a part of the congregation. They're experiencing it. Now we've got other tech coming along. Have you thought through any of that? Have you experimented any with immersive broadcast live streaming stuff?
Yeah, I know it's kind of funny because Chad used to work for me back at Bethel, which is great. We're great friends. And there were some people that were trying to push us when we were at Bethel to like get some 360 cameras and do all this stuff. And we were like, no, never going to happen. Throw that crap away. We were so against it. I think the technology has changed a ton, to where back in the day, the technology was like, oh, there's this blob and it has to be like 2 feet from someone. It's like, it was really dumb. Now the technology is a lot better, so it doesn't look as stupid. But my biggest thing is like, I don't want myself or people that I'm trying to engage with to have to sit there strapped to a headset, which is now isolating them from everything. Like, the whole Facebook metaverse, that whole stuff. It's just like, IT departments at these corporate businesses are buying these headsets and saying you have to attend your Zoom calls on a metaverse headset, which is like, I listen to a lot of tech podcasts about this kind of stuff. And so I'm like, man, I would never want to do that. Like, give me sunshine. If I have to have a Zoom call, I'm going to have it on a computer. I don't want to be stuck behind a VR headset all day long. That's just like, you're isolating people even more than they're already isolated into technology right now. I have to challenge myself to get off my phone, because it's like, I have a bigger social media presence than I'm on there constantly. And sometimes I have to be like, just stop being on my phone, because it's so easy to get in that. So then you add the next level of like VR and AR and that kind of stuff. So one of the cool things about technology, and this actually, so the whole VR AR thing, what can be cool is, and we've tried this at a church before and it kind of failed. I'd like to do it again. 5 years later now, I think we could do it better. But like doing more of like, it sounds stupid, but the hologram, but like the AR projection of someone into a facility for like overflow or another campus. I think that technology can be really cool because that has advanced a lot to where you can capture them more 3D and present it more 3D at another campus or an overflow room. So that's a little bit more immersive than just watching a projector or a TV. That would be really cool, but obviously you can't put that tech in homes. That's more of like a campus to campus type of thing, which can be
Yeah,
cool.
that's very interesting.
But which is really funny because I just did this shoot through Defy with Dolby at their Dolby Theater in Vegas, and they're wanting to do more of these shoots, and they were really pushing. They called it the cinematic experience. That's their goal. And so one of the things that we did for that shoot, there was 27 cameras, which was just obscene, but we had 5 Defy products. We had 4 rhythm tracks and a Dactyl, which is their cable cam. And I think that honestly, those types of shots add another level of being immersive than you can ever get with a handheld sticks or like even a steady cam. There's just a whole nother level to the shot that you can get that again makes you feel even more like you're in the room with those kinds of products. And so, and actually Defy has more products coming out in like the next 30 days that I can't quite talk about yet, but it's so sick because it aims more at the church industry. It's going to allow people to get their hands on stuff even more, which is like my cup of tea. So most of the people that couldn't get Defy stuff in, I could probably now with what they're coming out with. So really stoked about that. But I think even I did a shoot for Ocean's Church and I couldn't afford a rhythm in the budget. So I just got a professional Movi operator, which is like a gimbal operator. Great guy, great operator, killer shots. And I told him, I'm like, hey, my goal is you're my fake dolly. Like I can't lay a track down. I can't do all this stuff. So you're my dolly on a movie. And he killed it, but it still wasn't what I could get out of a rhythm track or anything like that. And so that's where I'm like, I think that getting those products is going to be even more immersive. You can't replicate like that top down cable cam going through the crowd. Like you can't replicate those shots, but there's something that it does to you emotionally when you're watching it. That's just like, it's almost better than being there in person, which is kind of crazy.
Right. Yeah, for sure. It's like watching a football game on TV is almost better than being there sometimes. So, and what about with your Dolby thing? So have y'all done any audio immersive stuff? I mean, I know that's like their thing.
Yeah. So this shoot was basically as a giant, it was for CES basically. So it was like this giant thing that Dolby put on for CES, which is the biggest tech trade show every year in Vegas. And so, yeah, it was live in Dolby Atmos. So the audio for Imagine Dragons was in Dolby Atmos.
Wow.
They recorded it in Atmos so they can mix it in Atmos. And so the whole thing is this experience, the cinematic experience. So you can hear it in Atmos, you can watch it, and this whole thing. I don't know when it's going to get released. I know they're editing it right now. I don't know when it's going to get released, but they want to release it in theaters, like movie theaters is kind of the goal. And then obviously Dolby Atmos is starting to come to homes. Like you can get sound bars with Dolby Atmos in it, which is crazy. Our AirPods have that same spatial audio technology, which is crazy. I think even Chris Greeley, who's like the famous Bethel audio guy, he made Bethel famous for sound. Even he's mixing in Dolby Atmos now for records. Like it's like the thing. So I do think that things will be moved more immersive. And I do think that for the home user, audio is probably the first place to go to be immersive. Like now you can get that surround sound mix. You can mix in surround sound live. That'd be a fun conversation to have with Luke Hendrickson about that, like mixing in surround sound live. But I think that the first step will probably be hitting the audio world. What's funny is like we're talking about VR, AR, and all this crazy stuff, but yet we're not fully live streaming in 4K yet.
Right.
We have these giant TVs. I was just at Costco the other day. 65-inch TVs now $350, 4K TV. I'm like, man, that used to be thousands. Like when big TVs were first started coming out, you'd pay a couple grand for that. Now you can buy that for $350. That's crazy. And And you're getting bigger and bigger TVs. They're 4K, 8K, all these TVs are coming out, and yet we're not streaming in 4K yet. We're not streaming in 8K yet. I think that's, 8K is a long way off, but it's still 4K isn't like standard. So
Yeah.
I'm like, let's try to get to that 4K first. Maybe implement HDR. That's a whole other thing that's becoming really big, is HDR broadcasting, which I think for concerts could be really cool because you can be more dynamic with your lights and you're not having these crazy blacks and
Hmm.
crazy highlights. It's more even. So I think there's a lot more to streaming before we even get into the AR VR type of thing.
Yeah. It's interesting to think about, but yeah, we're so far beyond that. But it's just fun to just conceptualize some of these things, and I think the church should be using the best technology that we can to. We've got the best message in the world. Why not, package it the best way we can? So,
100%. There's something about using the technology that we have, especially the younger generation, to help influence that generation. Back to the live streaming conversation. Your congregation might be all an older generation. Nothing wrong with that. But if you're trying to hit that younger generation, TikTok and Instagram might be the way to go. And that sounds funny, but that's where these kids are living. You know what I mean? Like,
hmm
people are living in those apps. And so you can live stream on Instagram. It's not the greatest, but you can. But like you're saying, content for later, like you live stream on YouTube, great, but now you have 1 hour's worth of content that you can chop up and throw on Reels, or you can throw on TikTok. And now you're able to reach another audience that you couldn't have before.
absolutely. Very cool convo, man. I wanted to end by just asking you just a few off the top of my head thoughts and questions that
Yeah.
maybe you can chime in on. And let's try to make these like as rapid fire as possible. So no deep dives on these.
Great.
Sorry, guys. These will be
Okay. All
extra
right. All right.
videos if we need to. So 24p versus 60p versus 30p. Why? What's the best? What should churches be doing?
I mean, movies are shot in 24 frames per second. If you want that cinema look, you got to go 24. If you want sports, NFL, go 60. 30 is kind of a great in between, but still doesn't do 24p justice. Like, if you want cinema, 24p is the right way to go.
You ever done the 24 for worship, 60 for sermon?
Long time ago, and that was mainly because people hated the sermon 24 look for iMag, but then we just kept doing it and people got used to it.
Nice. Favorite budget tripod sticks and head?
Oh, for sure, the Manfrotto 502 HD. I have a bunch of them. My favorite budget tripod. It's like $400 or less for that tripod, depending on your sticks. Great head. It works for a lot of things, honestly. I love it.
Okay. All right. Sweet. Yeah, I think we actually have one of those as well. I tried out a bunch, and the Nitro Tech I tried, and I was like, actually, we don't even need this Nitro Tech for what we're using it for.
Nah, I mean, like a Vision Blue 3 or 5, those are like those vintage heads, amazing heads. You don't always need it. I would probably invest more money into my follow cam tripod and make my 45s or my other tripods less. But I've done tons of shoots you would have no clue that they were all on a 502 HD.
How about that?
You set it right, you balance your camera right, you have a good operator, and it is killer.
Okay. Favorite controls to do servo stuff? Are you using Blackmagic stuff?
Like if you have a servo lens, like the Canon servo lenses, the servo controls are the best, in my opinion. If you're gonna go budget, the Tilta Nucleus is great. I mean, it's cheap. It does it. I haven't tried the small rig version of it yet. If you want to go super high end, Teradek RT Motion, that's really where it's at. So smooth, so nice, really expensive.
Yeah. Favorite wireless transmission system for, it doesn't have to be SDI. It could be HDMI.
I'm still gonna, I mean, my go-to is always Teradek. Like the 750 LTs or the 1500 LTs are great on a budget. The Rangers are awesome. I personally don't love Holyland wireless. I'd probably go with the Vaxis over Hollyland. Vax actually has great wireless. They just have a more compression data. Like they compress their data more, so it looks more compressed, and they don't do 4K. But their wireless is really good. So I've used Vaxis a ton. I've used Teradek a ton. Actually, another one that I used to use it a lot was the Cinegears Ghost Eye 600. Pretty good wireless, honestly, for the $1,500. It's pretty. I would definitely take it over a Hollyland any day.
Yeah, yeah. Favorite switcher under $2,000?
Oh, just go with the Constellation HD. Like the 1ME is like they're like $1,800 or something like that now.
2ME is $1,600 actually.
2ME, yeah. So I mean, if anyone's like, we need a switcher for less than 2K, Constellation HD all day. That thing is so powerful.
Yeah. Should churches, as they're buying new gear, only think 4K forward?
I would really try. Like, I know, again, I just recommended an HD switcher, but like, again, the budget predicts that, but anywhere that you can buy it. So it's like, I would say, this is a great example. If you can only afford an HD switcher, like that Constellation, but you can afford 12G SDI cabling, buy the cabling. Like run the cable once, buy it once. You can upgrade the switcher. It's super easy to swap out a switcher if all the cabling is already there. So I'd say like make sure the more infrastructure stuff. So buy 12G SDI, buy 12G SDI converters, and those types of things. I would make sure that those are 12G ready. And then if you can't afford the 4K switcher, get the 1080 switcher. There's nothing wrong with that. But as much as you can, be thinking 4K ready at least.
Dante NDI video, should we be thinking about those protocols yet?
The only thing that the only thing I'll ever personally use NDI for is pumping lyrics into a video server, like a Resolume server or media server, that kind of thing. ProPresenter NDI into like Resolume works great. Anytime that I've ever tried to introduce NDI anywhere else, even with a good network, it's been so 50-50 for me. And so it's not my favorite. I have installed, there's a church, long story short, they expanded their building to a whole other building 100 yards away and didn't trench a line underground. Stupidest thing ever. They came back and said, how do we get video over here? I said, well, you already have air fiber over for your network. We'll just pump NDI across and throw a bird dog NDI decoder over there. And it works, but it's not the greatest, but it does work. So I don't love NDI yet. It has some useful tools that we have used, but I don't think it's 100% in the stable market yet, I would say.
Okay. Dude, awesome thoughts. I just appreciate you coming on the channel and just chatting about, church tech broadcast stuff. I mean, guys like you that have kind of blazed the trail in some of these areas, even as young as you are, so I just appreciate getting your thoughts. And hopefully, guys, if you've watched this video to now, this is an encouragement to you that, there's lots of tools out there that we can use, right? It's just like, what do we need to do to accomplish the job the best that we can on budget, and consider that just to make things the best that we can for God's glory. That's what it's all about. So, Drake, tell 100%. Everybody about your new stuff with LAD Designs. Is it laddesigns.co? .co, yep,
okay. .co. laddesigns.co. It's my new design company that I started to do concert films, stage designs, all kinds of stuff, basically. So we do anything from like concert films, conferences, tours, whatever, designing video systems, designing lighting systems, production management. We've wrapped so much into the company, but it's just our way to be creative. And, we started a little subcategory called on Instagram is church stage design. It's brand new, and it's our way to help churches, no matter the budget, no matter the size of their room, get good lighting for camera and in person. Let's just optimize what you have. So that's kind of our goal. LAD is kind of the umbrella for everything, doing films and designs and that kind of stuff.
Very cool. Yeah, we didn't even talk about lighting. Come on, that'll affect everything that we just said.
Whole other topic. You can, I'll throw this one plug in real fast. You can buy million worth of cameras, and if you have crappy lighting, you're just enhancing the crappy lighting. Lighting is everything when it comes to broadcast.
Yep. Awesome. All right, guys, we'll do this again sometime. Until then, remember, we can do a lot of great things. Let's do it all for God's glory. We'll see you in the next one.